Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jill Aitoro, Editor-in-Chief of SC Media and Editorial Director at Cyber Risk Alliance. I am so pleased to introduce Jerry Geisler. He is the Global CISO for Walmart, and he and I are going to chat a little bit about some of the innovation that is happening in the retail space when it comes to security. Jerry, thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you, Joe. I'm happy to be here.
So needless to say, I'm going to start pre-COVID because I feel like the pandemic obviously shifted things dramatically for the retail industry. But pre-COVID, obviously retail customers were rapidly transitioning online away from what we all have described as the big box stores, which Walmart was often described as well. How, looking ahead of the pandemic, how did Walmart consider security while accommodating that shift in behavior from the customers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jill. Thanks. We put our customers first. It's part of our culture and our values, and helps us to keep aligned with our business partners and their priorities. With our security teams, especially enterprise level security teams, of course, it's important that we have a robust security stack in place to protect the customers regardless of the shifts in or trends in their behaviors. So moving to where the customer wants to be met. So as we saw those shifts emerging in our business, we were actually fairly well positioned because we looked at well before the pandemic accelerated that shift. We looked at how we were already positioned, and we work very much hand in glove with our business.
Great. So now you do look at the pandemic. Demand accelerated dramatically. None of us could necessarily have predicted this was going on. Combine that with certain supply chain issues that I know impacted availability of offerings and so forth. Remote work on top of all of that. Walmart, I will say, received a lot of credit for how it served customers. I remember reading an article that it was battling Amazon even in terms of its marketplace capabilities. So with that surge, how did that evolve? How you as a security leader responded on the back end? Do you have any examples of what you all did to be able to accommodate the rapid surge and also battle some of the challenges that came along with that? Any examples of what you all did?
Yes, certainly. That's a great question. So as customer behavior shifted during the pandemic, we had measures already in place for a proactive approach that allowed us to scale quickly. I'll give you three examples. As an essential business, Walmart added about 250,000 new associates to support that shift in consumer demand or consumer behavior, shifting to online and pickup shopping. For security, that meant our identity and access teams worked quickly and closely with our business to streamline processes so that our stores could rapidly onboard these new team members to meet the demands for staffing. In order to do that, we needed to find a way to reduce the process from about 1 week to about 1 day.
Wow.
So we focused largely on reducing that time through automation and driving out as many manual processes as possible. That allowed us to meet that surge in demand for staffing that was necessary, again, to meet the customer where they wanted to be served. So in addition to the increase in demand for provisioning or onboarding services, of course, we're also responsible for securing our corporate network so that our associates that work corporately were able to start transitioning to remote work. Obviously, the pandemic necessitated that. We saw about 1,000% increase in utilization of our remote access tools as our corporate associates shifted how they were working. Fortunately, we had some smart engineers who thought well ahead They didn't anticipate a pandemic, of course, but they had thought through various disaster recovery or business continuance scenarios that might necessitate remote work. And they made the decision well before the pandemic arose that where we were deploying a remote access license, we would also maintain the same backend capacity to allow for all of those licenses to connect concurrently, which would be well above anything we had ever seen in a normal day-to-day operations. Their forethought served us well. So when we needed to ramp, we actually had the capacity to allow everyone to, it actually occurred over a weekend, to shift from being in the office to working remotely.
Wow.
So again, their forethought really did serve us well. The other one that we didn't necessarily anticipate was around bot mitigation. There's been a number of articles written on that over the last year. And while we had bot mitigation in place already, it became even more important during the pandemic as it became somewhat commonplace for enterprising individuals or groups to try to buy high demand items like next generation gaming consoles, as an example, and resell those for a profit. So our teams worked with other teams across tech, across product, across our business to understand what was the demand signal we were seeing from the consumer, what was the timing of our inventory drops, and how could we adjust our security layers to slow down that bot traffic while maintaining a positive customer experience.
That is huge. We've written about that actually. So, can you dig into that a little bit more in terms of, how you approached it from a technological standpoint and the results, if you don't mind, if you have any kind of specifics on that.
Sure. And that's one that is constantly evolving. And like many pieces of our security program, there's multiple layers. So we don't rely just on one technology or one technique, but rather multiple technologies. And of course, we have engineers dedicated to this space. And we work with our product teams, we work with our e-commerce development teams, and we test to see, what is the efficacy of certain approaches around bot mitigation. And of course, we're also testing to make sure that any adjustments that we make, that they will scale, that, if it's a certain service or capability that doesn't fall over under load. But just as importantly, that we're not causing some type of insult or frustration for the customer. So there's always that fine line that you're trying to balance of realizing, while there is risk here, there's also reward for the business. So we don't want to suboptimize the customer experience. We obviously don't go too deep into technically how we do it, because I'm certain that others that will watch this interview as well. But suffice it to say that, as closely as I think bot operators study us and in the changes we make, that goes both ways. So, we're obviously always looking for what are the adjustments that the bots are making to whatever mitigations we're putting in place. So it's certainly not static, but it evolves as we see that threat landscape evolve.
That makes sense. And you just gave a perfect example, but my next question was, we've heard a lot about how retail was targeted, almost as during this pandemic, there were certain industries that were seen as potentially vulnerable because of the surge. Obviously, healthcare experiences quite a bit. Retail was another one. You gave a really great example just now in terms of how you did see that. Were there any other areas where you saw an increase in terms of bad actors targeting the network or consumers, consumer information, whatever it may be, and how Walmart responded?
So we don't comment very specifically on what we see in terms of the threat landscape, but suffice it to say that even pre-pandemic, we always work day in and day out to ensure that our enterprise security posture is as resistant and as resilient as we can possibly build it. I think, one of the things that we did that has continued to serve us well is we've made investments in things like cyber intelligence, which allows us to identify trends and emergent threats, ideally to position the company proactively so that the things that we regularly read about, that we aren't part of those issues, but rather that we're trying to position the organization ahead of those threats.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Something that we're really looking at in terms of awareness is more how companies are recognizing or acknowledging that cybersecurity does not need to be an obstacle, does not need to be a hindrance to innovation, and can actually be a differentiator. So, for Walmart, as a company, how is efforts in the cybersecurity realm viewed from the corporate level, from the various stakeholder levels, and how do you and your team communicate the significance out to ensure it is seen as a business driver and not an obstacle?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jill, and I think it comes down to trust and working closely. Security departments should be enablers. A phrase that I always use with my team, and I'm certain that I heard it somewhere from another CISO or security practitioner, is we don't want to be the department of no, but rather the department of how. And when you take that mindset and that approach, you develop trust relationships with your peer teams and with the business. So in terms of security as part of the business priorities, I really try to think of it really with two main questions. And the first is, what are we doing proactively to reduce risk? And secondly, how can we prepare to react and respond when a risk is realized? So proactively, those things include training and awareness for all levels of the organization. That may be something such as a phishing simulation, education, and awareness campaigns across multiple communication channels. But equally as important is leadership transparency, to highlight those risks and or the risk-related controls as they relate to business initiatives, and help to guide the organization through those questions or considerations. And I think really what's key here is preparation. You don't want to try and figure these things out in the middle of a crisis. So things such as conducting executive tabletop exercises, or as I mentioned, even building our own cyber intelligence capability in an effort to stay ahead of those emergent threats, help us to maintain that focus. In today's digital world, information security is quintessential, and companies should ensure that there's an appropriate level of focus on talent and resourcing and prioritization for their information security teams. And on the information security side of that equation is, honest engagement with the intent to not only protect the business, but also to enable the business. When we think about competitive advantage in terms of the industry, I think one thing that I've always thought was a fascinating aspect of the information security community is that it's truly a collaborative environment. Thus, I view the industry and how the industry collaborates and discusses trends or best practices or standards really as an advantage for everyone working in this field. And really all it requires is some intentional engagement on your part. We're all dealing with the same issues, and we can learn from the collective. Competitive advantage from a business viewpoint where information security is concerned, I think really might be looking at it incorrectly. It comes down to trust, and that should be an expectation of your customer, and one that you want to meet. So certainly speaking, of the customer, Walmart strives to be the most trusted retailer, and our InfoSec team obviously plays a crucial role in maintaining that trust and earning and maintaining that customer trust. Again, it's an expectation both from the customer and from our business stakeholders, as it should be. But it's not just about maintaining customer trust. Of course, we have 2.3 million associates, and we have to protect their data as well. And they rely upon us to ensure that the systems that they rely upon to operate the business remain both safeguarded and available. So it's all of those variables really coming together to serve and work with the business and enable the business to meet their strategic goals and objectives.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch over the last year, even longer now, how recent situations, whether to some degree the pandemic, but even SolarWinds and all of the various cyber attacks that have been high profile, I feel like I'm suddenly seeing more companies realize that this is a message that has to be communicated to their customers and stakeholders, that we do pay attention. We are focusing on security. We are being respectful of your information, as opposed to doing it in the background and thinking somebody will take care of it. It seems like there's a little bit more awareness that this can be a demand and a differentiator if handled correctly. Is that fair to say?
I think that is fair to say, in where Walmart's concerned, we're always going to err on the side of transparency, because that's core to building and maintaining trust with all of your stakeholders. And I'll share with you a few ways in which we do that. So our cybersecurity programs or our information security programs, they're included in our annual environmental, social, and governance report. So we intentionally put that out there for consumption.
And that's public, you mean?
Absolutely.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Specifically for investors, we outline those risks in our 10K filings. Yeah. And for our customers, we follow and maintain industry standards, in addition to working with our peer teams to adhere to things like privacy standards. And we, again, publish all of that on our website. Not specifically related to how we communicate, possible issues, but as an example of a proactive approach that we try to take is how we share cyber hygiene tips and best practices, even over Walmart Radio, which broadcasts to all of our stores. Not something you'd necessarily expect to hear when you're in a store coming from our broadcast, but we believe it's important for everyone to be diligent in protecting their digital life and their digital persona, even outside of Walmart. So that's just one way that we work to increase that awareness with our customers.
So it's through messaging within the stores. There's encouragement. Sure. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Leveraging whatever channel that we have, and certainly realizing that most companies may not have something like that. But what I would encourage others in the field to consider when thinking about transparency is what do they have at their disposal, and how could our industry better collaborate to make the digital ecosystem safer for the public. And certainly that goes beyond due diligence reports for stakeholders, but really speaks to proactive measures that I believe the industry can and should make happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is terrific. I'm afraid we're out of time, but Jerry, thank you so much. Very much appreciate you offering us some time today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.